I am the founder and CEO of Inclusivi-TEA, and this is our podcast, Inclusivi-TALKS. Today, we are incredibly lucky to be talking to Rebecca Blake Thompson, who I met because her company, the company she works for, IndieSource, is actually working with us to produce our bags and our jackets for our new shareables line. And Rebecca and I just got to talking, and I realized that she is passionate about the environment and about eco-friendly fashion. And so it seemed like a perfect fit to have her on the website as we launch. So Rebecca, we're going to talk about that in a little while, but I'd like to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about you, sort of where you came from, how you got to where you're at now, and what your passions are.
Thank you, Lori. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very excited that your followers are going to be learning more about the work that you're doing, because you have inspired me since we've met. I have been working in the fashion industry for about 12 years. I've been a buyer, I've been in sales, I've been in merchandising. I've overseen product development, marketing, brand development. And I had my, aha moment as far as fashion goes. It's probably been about 5 years now since I saw The True Cost by EcoAge, Olivia Firth's team, that recorded the documentary about, it touched on the environmental issues, but more specifically the makers behind our clothing. And though I had been in the industry for many years and been very involved, there was still so much that was not transparent, that I didn't have access to it, that I didn't know. And that really opened my eyes and instilled in me what I think is just the most important quality for us to have as both consumers and professionals, which is just curiosity. So the curiosity to learn more, to ask more questions, to, get answers to the things I didn't know, so that I could choose to make decisions based on what I knew instead of just blindly making decisions. So since then, I stayed, fully immersed in fashion, but began pursuing my master's in sustainability management, an MBA program. I'm an ambassador and, the senior community engagement leader for remake.world. And I do investigatory journalism surrounding sustainable fashion. So my goal is just to find more people who are curious, to bring them into the conversation of what does sustainable fashion even mean, and, who does it affect? And so that's what I'm excited to talk to you about today, among a lot of other things. There's so much going on in the world right now, so there's lots to talk about.
When you first saw that documentary, you said there were a lot of things that you were your eyes were opened to things. What would you say is a big takeaway that you took, that you really want people who are listening to say, oh, okay, that leads me to want to be more curious, that leads me to jump in and learn more?
Well, for me, it was the human connection. I mean, it was super troubling to see, the toxic dye runoff into waterways where people bathed and drank and, washed their clothes. It was super troubling to understand, what was going to landfills and, the environmental impact. But I think, what really woke me up and what was interesting, in a lot of ways, we tend to compartmentalize the environment and humans. And we think that, we need to protect ourselves, to take care of ourselves first, to meet our own needs. And we've somehow created this cognitive dissonance of how intrinsically, embedded we are into every ecosystem on the planet. We can't live without breathing air. We can't live without drinking water and eating food. And so for me, the aha moment was, okay, well, there's not only these environmental impacts going on. But the things that are happening to the environment, the way that we're poisoning the environment, we're self-poisoning, right? We're swallowing this stuff, we're drinking this stuff, we're eating this stuff. All of these, these terrible things that we're doing to the earth, we just have to turn around and consume it right back, because the only place we get our air and water and food from is from the earth. And so not just that, not just seeing how intrinsically, we're connected, but then also understanding the social justice component and understanding that, there are a pair of hands behind every single garment we make. I mean, I think a lot of people believe that, with the proliferation of fast fashion, I think a lot of people assume that clothing can now be fully made on a machine and that there aren't human hands involved in the process. And the reality is that if there's a seam, if there's a stitch, then human hands had to guide those pieces of fabric through a machine. It's a soft good. So the way that it's manipulated and the way that it's moved, inherently means that it can't be fully mechanized. And so for me, it was kind of the realization that every single piece of clothing I've ever owned and will ever own and have on my body have been touched by not just one pair or two pairs, but dozens of hands. And how I treat my clothing, what I pay for my clothing, how long I take care of it, how long I own it, how did all of those things affect the people that touched them before they even got to me, and so those were some of the connections that I drew. And, it's like, once once you learn, you can't unlearn, you can't unsee. So it affects everything.
Yeah. And that's sort of what brought me to this too, where we're, launching this new product that really is as eco-friendly as we can make it. When I, first started doing the t-shirts, I started doing all sorts of research on where the material came from and all the impacts. And I was struck by not only the justice component of it, which I think, again, you're right, that not very many people think of. And I was also struck with just the number of t-shirts that we're creating and just the number of products that we use and how quickly we discard them, and how the impact is significant for that. So I appreciate everything you're saying, and it sounds like you learned a lot from that. And so now you've jumped into a master's program. How far along are you on the program?
Gosh, I'm a full-time working mother of a 3-year-old, so I'm not exactly following the traditional path that a lot of my peers are, where it's just a 2-year program. I've had to kind of take breaks and jump in and out. So I'm over halfway done of what would be a 2-year program. Okay. So I have a few courses left. But it's really exciting because, a traditional MBA program, of course, combines, people that you might not really see show up in a sustainable MBA program. But I think what's exciting for me, being one of the only fashion people in the room with my peers, is to see how much people from the energy sector and from agriculture and from impact investing and all these worlds can come together. And the reality is that if you are passionate about sustainability, then no matter how diverse, your industry or your sector is, we all share a common goal. And again, the same way that ecosystems work, and the way that, we're all interconnected, the reality is that as polar, opposite as some industries can seem, we're all relying on resources extracted from the same places, and we're all relying on human capital, and we're all relying on consumers, whether they be direct consumers or business to business consumers in the same way. So there's a lot of ways that we can collaborate and cross over, kind of cross sector to learn from each other. So that's been really exciting.
That is really exciting. So have you read anything about the belief that things like pandemics may be more often happening because of our effects on the environment? And if you
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is that um, the further, human disruption that the further disruption that humans cause to natural environments and natural habitats, the more we displace animals, the more we displace, natural ecosystems, then things are thrown out of balance, right? Things are thrown out of whack. And, the current crisis has been traced back to a human consuming a bat, which, can carry all kinds of diseases. So looking at, kind of understanding that the effects of pandemics in terms of how it disrupts our society is really only a sliver, kind of a preview of what can happen when real, climate emergency type change starts to happen, because people don't make the connection that climate change means there will be droughts and less access to water. There will be droughts and less access to food. There will be mass migrations because people need to move closer to resources. There will be mass displacement. There will be mass shortages and access to things. And I think, the reality is that for us being very privileged people in a first world country, we're able to say that, well, we can still purchase the luxuries we need. We can still purchase the access we need. We can still purchase the resources. But a huge portion of the global population already, is being fully affected by climate change in terms of losing the natural resources that they rely on for food and water and shelter, causing mass migration, having to leave their home, losing their jobs because they can't farm the land or they can't work in the traditional industries that require the natural ecosystems to be in balance and to be flourishing. We've gotten to an overconsumption point in almost every category. We over consume in comparison to what we really need, and we disproportionately consume in correlation to different demographics, different incomes, different socioeconomic status. So I think, unfortunately, those who are doing the most damage and doing the most consumption are the ones that are the most removed from the damage that they're causing. They're the ones that are most removed from the effects of climate change. And those who are suffering the most are causing the least damage and causing the least harm, yet suffering the consequences. So yes, pandemics are but a preview of the real catastrophe that can happen when we disrupt, very delicate ecosystems and balance, and don't respect the natural order of things. So the bright spot is that this is waking some people up to that, and some people are making the connection. More recently in the news, we've seen the dark spots, which is, ugly or violent behavior coming out of this in a time where humans need to be kinder to each other than ever. So I'm staying optimistic and hoping that this is a moment that kind of helps people see the potential of not just the damage we can cause, but how powerful we are to create and affect change. Mm-hmm. I think that before this crisis, and you and I have chatted about this, Lori, but I think before this crisis, what we saw was that a lot of people just kind of have a, well, what difference do I make attitude? It's just me. What difference does it make if I take the plastic bags from the grocery store and I don't recycle and I eat too much meat and I, don't drive an eco-friendly car? And part of that, is not the consumer's responsibility. The reality is that a lot of that has been perpetuated by large corporations who do dictate, the resources that we have access to. And a lot of that's out of our control. And they need to be held accountable. So I'm not minimizing that. But what I'm shining a light on is the fact that I think a lot of people just thought, well, climate change is inevitable, or what difference does it make considering how far we've come? And that in this very short time of, the stay-at-home restrictions, and in a lot of the parts of the world, self-quarantining, or quarantining by mandate, we've seen a drastic impact on the environment. Animals are coming out of the wild into urban landscapes. The waters in Venice are running clear for the first time that many of the residents who have lived there their whole life have ever seen. The pollution over the skies in LA is cleared up. And that, and you and I talked, that was just a few weeks. And there's already noticeable differences. So I think some people are starting to say, oh, well, maybe we could actually make a difference, Maybe.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that as we were talking about the pandemic, the other thing I just read is that even air pollution actually helps the pandemic molecules go further. So as our air is more polluted, those molecules can actually stay in the air, which means that even the spread of the pandemic among us is worse, the worse our air pollution is. And I think that hopefully brings home to people how important this is to us. It's not just breathing the smog. That's not the only problem with it. It's also that germs stay in the air longer, and we are more likely to get sick. So I think that all of this is such important information for us to have.
Well, and compromised, ecosystem, poor air quality compromises your immune system. So if, you're not getting, fresh sunlight and breathing fresh air and have clean drinking water, and if you don't have access to, fresh fruits and vegetables, the reality is that, you're living in a compromised environment that, will continue to thwart your ability to fight off disease once you do get it. So it's like you said, it's kind of like a double, triple whammy, the worse off the planet is, and the worse we treat it, the easier it is for, pandemics and climate change to amplify. But then that's the flip side of the coin, and the encouraging part, that the more we do to protect the environment and to treasure it, the more we do to be conscious of our actions, then we're that much healthier. We're that much less vulnerable. We're that much more, the infrastructure is more stable and sustainable when these things do hit. I think, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, finish your statement, and then I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, the other thing that this global pandemic is bringing to life, and, in glaring disparity, is, socioeconomic divides of people that have access to resources and have access to work at home from a computer and have access to, still receive income if they can't physically go to work, and the people that don't. And how, when our society and our, political economy is set up in this way, then those who are vulnerable to sickness and disease and instability will only continue to be more vulnerable, and those who are protected will only continue to be more protected as these situations escalate. So I think it also, really shines a spotlight on those glaring inequalities and the attention that needs to be put there.
Well, and what I love is that when I started Inclusivity, the goal was to promote both environmental and social justice, and because they're so closely linked. And I think these kind of conversations really bring home that they are intimately linked, and that we need to address them both, and that pollution and the way we're damaging the earth much more strongly hits in people who live in communities that are already in some poverty or already at risk. So I think these conversations are incredibly important, and it makes sense for us to say that we're committed to both, that both are important and both are worthy of our attention. So Rebecca, having said all of this and saying these are all the sort of reasons to change, and that we've caused some damage and we're concerned about the effect of fashion on the environment, what is your sort of goal? What's your plan? If you, as someone in the fashion industry, what would you like to see happen? Like, what has to happen next? What are the steps?
If I could wave a magic wand.
Wave a magic wand.
Well, there's a lot of competing priorities and a lot of competing realities, right? Because if you truly wanted to, fix, fashion, we wouldn't have, virgin feedstock. We would be able to reuse, raw materials. We'd be able to recycle them infinitely. We'd be able to mend and repair. We'd be able to ensure that supply chains were always transparent, that we knew who the makers were behind the machines, that companies were transparent about how much those workers were getting paid, what their healthcare coverage is, that they had paid sick leave, all of these things, right? The reason I fell in love with fashion is because, to me, fashion it's my preferred form of art, right? Some people like music and photography. I like the way that you can manipulate different fabrics to drape around the body. I like the way that fabrics have different textures and colors. I like how endlessly creative you can be with where you put a seam and how it, changes the way the wearer feels and can express themselves. And the reality is that there will always be consumption, and that's not a bad thing, right? Continuing to produce new clothing, continuing to feed consumer demand, all of this is a reality. People will always want to buy stuff, and they will always want newness, right? But the solutions lie in how can we provide for consumer demand in a way that we're using materials that are sustainable. And by sustainable, we mean that you could rely on the use and the extraction of these materials ad infinitum without damage to the environment, right? Or within some sort of closed loop system where what you take, you're able to easily replenish in a quick amount of time, right? So I think what's really exciting is that the answer to sustainable fashion truly lies in just creativity and innovation. How can we be more creative about the materials we're using? How can we, be more thoughtful as designers and as industry insiders in terms of designing sustainability into products, designing that they have a longer life cycle, designing that they're able to be mended and repaired, offering consumers those programs for mending and repairing. But the real answer and the real opportunity lies with the consumer, because the consumer, just like a politician in power who has to get voted in, corporate fashion brands do not exist without paying customers. Mm-hmm. So the reality is that if tomorrow all of Inditex, who make Inditex, who make Zara, and if tomorrow every single one of those customers woke up and said, we're not shopping from you until you're sustainable, they would get sustainable real fast, as fast as they could, because without paying customers, they're out of business. So the true power lies in customers, and this is why I love the idea of curiosity so much. The true power lies in customers educating themselves, being more curious, asking more questions, and holding fashion brands accountable and saying, I'm not going to buy from you until I know that you're paying your workers fairly. I'm not going to buy from you until I know that if I spend $150 on a jacket with you and it tears, that I can send it to you and you'll repair it. Or that, I as a consumer know that if I invest $150 in something and it tears, I'm going to repair it. I'm going to take it to get mended and I'm going to care for it. Mm-hmm. It's about consumers understanding how much power they truly do have. It's just like your vote. It's just like your sustainable actions. We often think that we as one person don't make a difference. But if we can use our voice to, educate others, I live in Los Angeles. I consider myself a New Yorker because I lived there for 10 years, but I'm from Georgia. And a lot of my friends and family who follow the work I do, will say that, oh, I've never been exposed to it. No one's ever said it that way. I never thought about it. So, the most rewarding thing for me is when I get a family member or a friend who will message me on social media and say, I like had this hole in my jeans. I was going to throw them out, but I took them to the dry cleaner to get repaired this weekend because of you. Or I was going to buy this new dress for this wedding I had to go to, but I thought about you and I went to a thrift store and bought one at a thrift store instead, things like that. And so we always think that we don't make a difference, but using our voice and sharing our voice with others is how is the human condition, right? It's how we tell stories. It's how we connect. And I truly believe in the power of individuals changing their behavior to not just make a difference, but to use their voice to demand for a difference, and to not just accept the status quo, to not just accept things the way they are. But I think to get back to your original question, if I could just wave a magic wand and make fashion sustainable, it would start with the consumers, saying, I'm going to change my consumption habits. I'm not going to buy, 10 shirts from H&M for $10 each. I'm going to invest in nicer clothing. And look, I understand that a lot of people can't afford $100 t-shirt. And the answer is, okay, well then instead of going to H&M and buying that $10 shirt, go to a thrift store and find a quality, well-made shirt that was, made 30 years ago that's going to last you longer than the one you buy from H&M now. So thinking about how we as consumers can demand more from brands, but also how we can change our behavior to affect our consumption, that's what's really going to make a difference.
And Rebecca, don't you also think that as people demand eco-friendly will become more affordable?
Absolutely.
The demand is there that we start using environment friendly hemp, for example, so that more hemp is manufactured. The cost of the hemp clothing goes significantly down. So I think that that's the other thing that, from my perspective, I think people have to start really thinking. If I'm talking about environmentally friendly, then I have to be part of the push that gets that to happen. And I think that's hard. I think it's a hard sell, but I'm hoping to find ways to make it an easier sell.
Well, I mean, we've already seen that happen. There's a denim designer, Triarchy Denim. I've interviewed Adam. He's one of the founders, along with his brothers and sisters, several times. And he said even in the few years that he's been producing sustainable denim, his mills, his fabric mills will tell him, oh, we're getting more and more requests for this, we're getting more and more requests for that. And so the reality is, to your point, they can start to phase out the things that are in lower demand, the things that are more toxic, the things that are less eco-friendly can get phased out and replaced by higher demand for the more eco-friendly, less water use, less dyes, less harsh chemicals products. But to that point, brands could make all the, eco-friendly products, but unless consumers engage and support them and buy them, they just sit on a shelf. So to keep that cycle going, to keep, the mills making more eco-friendly options and phasing out the non-eco-friendly ones, requires that consumers are voting with their wallet and making that choice. And I think it's really just about a pause. So much of our consumption has become so impulsive. And look, I'm super guilty. Like, I love fashion. So, for me, it's been a very long learning curve. But now if I get an impulse to buy something, just because I'm having a bad day or whatever, I only buy secondhand. So that's my rule. If I have an impulse and I want to buy something, it's fine, but I have to buy it secondhand. I don't go just buy something new impulsively. So, it's also about pausing and saying, okay, well, we don't want to take the fun out of fashion. We don't want to take the expression out of it. I mean, that's what's so beautiful, is that people can express whoever they are, whatever their personality is, whatever they want to look like, they can do that. And that's what's so wonderful about fashion. A lot of people, when I got into this career, would knock me for saying, oh, fashion, that's so superficial. And I would always just turn back to them and say, have you ever left your house naked?
Yeah.
No. So the reality is that it is something that you interact with every day. It's something you think about every day. It's something you put on your body to protect yourself from the elements every day. So why can't we have fun with something that is necessary? Why can't we have expression and joy and enjoy the collaboration and the creativity and the beauty of it? So it's not that we want it to go away. It's just that we need to find more thoughtfulness, more purpose, and more creativity in how we're producing and consuming it.
Yeah. And that is ultimately, like, for us, the whole reason that we came up with Shareables, which is our new concept, is that desire to create something that people can use one product and have lots of different things with it. And so I think that's how we started this conversation. Actually, was, when I reached out and said, we're creating this product that you can change the look on the same product with just a little panel. So I think that's one of the exciting things for us, is we really like the idea of being part of that push, whether it's our products or looking at things in a different way and looking for alternatives that call for less production while still allow individuality and expression. So I think that, and I do think consumers are the ones who will push that. I think that's really right.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so cool about Shareables. And to your point is, you're investing in a high quality, frame for the artwork, whether it's on a denim jacket or a tote, what the wearer can add it to is something that is well made and can stand the test of time and can be mended and can be repaired, and is an investment because the people that made it are getting paid well, and the materials that go into it are thoughtful. But to that point, like, how cool is that you can invest in something that serves as that canvas, but you can change the art every day, because that really is what's fun and beautiful about fashion. And it doesn't need to be all doom and gloom. There's a lot of opportunities. And what you're doing is exactly what I'm saying. If we can find creative, ingenuitive ways to still get to change your expression every day, but that doesn't rely on mass consumption, that still allows you to express your personal style, but that it doesn't come at a cost of, women working for cents a day, things like that, then that's great. And then that's what needs to happen, and it, it's just, it's so interesting to me, an industry that prides itself on being so creative in terms of producing, these whimsical designs, runway designs, new collections, 5, 6, 7 seasons a year, constant newness. When challenged with, okay, but how do you get creative about your resources? How do you get creative about your supply chain? How do you get creative about, what happens to your product once it starts to break down? How do you get creative about how consumers can swap and share and resell your product? How do you get, then it's like everybody clams up and nobody has an answer. And so I think that's why what you're doing is so cool, is because you're not shying away from that. You're still finding ways that customers, can express their creativity and can feed that desire to, be different people on different days, have different looks, express whatever mood they're in at that moment without that constant need for expression to have such a heavy toll on resources.
That's certainly our goal with this. And our goal is to create something beautiful and lasting that you can have forever. So this has been really interesting and fun to talk about this sustainable. Are you hopeful? Are you hopeful that we can do this?
I am. Naturally, I'm a very pessimistic. I think I'm a realist, but everyone in my life, my husband and my family, tell me that I'm actually just a pessimist. I consider myself realistic, but no, I actually do feel very hopeful about this, and kind of bring it back to the present moment with the COVID crisis. A lot of people are going into some really dark, periods of depression and anxiety with this. And I absolutely understand and empathize with that. But I fortunately have been able to maintain an attitude that I think some really cool stuff is going to come out of this. And I think, and I'm not discounting any illness or death that anyone has had to suffer. Absolutely not. I'm not saying that any of that makes this worth it. But what I am saying is that this could only be negative and this could only have very dire consequences. But I think we have an opportunity to use this as a way to reassess life as usual, business as usual, and to make sure that it wasn't all for naught, that it wasn't just for death and suffering and pain and hardship, but that in spite of all that, we were able to find something positive and good, and that it challenges the creativity of a lot of people who are now given, the luxury, it's for those of us who are privileged to be able to sit home and to be safe and to, quarantine ourselves, have had a lot of time to reflect. And it's almost the obligation to use that privilege to be creative and to find new paths forward and to propose new ways of doing things. And it's also the obligation of that privilege to reassess how you as a human interact with other humans, and how you as a human consume the resources that you consume, and how you respect the resources you have access to. So my optimistic hope is that people will use this as an opportunity to find new ways of doing things. And my thought is that if that does happen, then the ramifications will be positive across all sectors, and that drastically affects fashion, because fashion is a consumer consumption driven model that is ripe for a reevaluation. So I think the way that we've been able to reevaluate our consumption through this time will hopefully also, have ripple effects into how we consume fashion as well.
So before we turned on the recording, we were talking a little bit about how this has affected us, the COVID-19 situation.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying that some days it's just hard to get up. So I'm just curious, what do you do then to make yourself do that? What is sort of the strategy you use to kind of pull yourself out of that?
Well, I have a 3-year-old, and he'll start just hooping and hollering. So I don't have much of a choice there. But I think more existentially, the answer is that as daunting as it is to go through email inboxes and requirements and, your obligations these days, in each interaction, we're given the opportunity to connect with a human in a way that we haven't before, and to try to empathize with what someone's going through on the other side of the camera. I mean, the only people that I physically interact with on a daily basis are my husband and my son, right? Because we're at home. So that means that every other interaction I have, unless it's an emergency grocery store run, is virtually, as you and I are doing now. And so I think what gets me up and what gets me going is this is just as hard for other people, if not harder. And how can I try to make any interactions that I have today, how can I be empathetic towards what that person is going through and show up for them, because, we're all showing up for each other. And how can I use this as a moment to find a way within the conversation to show them that I understand, or that I can offer help if they need it, or be supportive, with the hopes that, if someone sees that need in me, that they'll offer it too, and just knowing how much, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a professional consultant, I'm a journalist, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I'm a student, I'm a mom, I'm a wife. So also, just kind of saying, okay, well, these obligations are also obligations to other people. And if I can try to be what they need, and they can try to be what I need, then hopefully, we can kind of all get through this together. But it is draining in a way that I've, having a newborn and a toddler and being a full-time working mom, I've never been this tired before. And it's just bizarre because I'm not doing anything. I'm not running around. I'm not physically exhausting myself. But, as we chatted about the general kind of weight of the crisis and the anxiety that you see other people, especially loved ones, some of my loved ones are handling this well, and some are not handling it well at all. So, you carry a lot of their anxiety on yourself, and that can just be really draining,
Yeah, and I think that's what you said is well spoken. That kind of noticing other people and paying attention to how other people are doing, and remembering that we are so much all in this together is helpful. At least to make you feel like you're not out there all alone. That everyone is struggling a bit right now, and I think there is this just general angst and anxiety going on that really calls us to take some breaths and to really enjoy our 3-year-old when when your 3-year-old is there, to really appreciate that and to appreciate these interactions and the moments where you do feel connected to someone and share a common goal, and to slow down, and frankly to give yourself a break if you feel a little lethargic sometimes. That is kind of a normal feeling right now, so it is okay. Good to try to pull yourself out of it so that you can do what you do want to do. But also okay to give yourself a break if you're not performing at what you would consider your peak right now, because I think it's hard to do that in this situation. So before we end, I want to, first of all, just thank you for all of this, because it was wonderful and great to hear your perspective and to talk about sustainable fashion, because it's pretty near and dear to our hearts. But I also just want to ask you if you had a piece of advice for people, if you just had like a life philosophy piece of advice, or something that you would say, here's something I want people to know, or something I want people to believe or do, what would that be?
I think I would have to go back to curiosity and my encouragement that in all things you maintain just a voracious curiosity about life, about the person you're speaking to, about what they're going through, about the food you're consuming, about the clothes you're putting on your body, about where things come from, how they're made, who made them, what is their life like, because I think that insatiable curiosity not only leads to, knowledge and wisdom, but it leads to great empathy, because the more we think about and question and are curious about other people's experiences, then the more perspective we have on how much we have and what we can be grateful for. And so I would just say, stay very curious. It also just makes life more interesting and fun. And I think it keeps you young, and I think it keeps you creative and playful. And I think it makes you not afraid to try new things or take chances, because, even if I, flounder and fail, I'm curious. And so when I get to the bottom, I'm going to start asking questions and trying new things and figure out a different path forward. So I think it really saves you too. If you maintain a curiosity, then you're safe in life, because you'll always, be able to find more information, more support, more empathy, more resources. So that would be my advice. Stay very curious.
I like that a lot. And then to end, I always like to ask people to tell us a story, and a story from your life, and it doesn't have to be the story. It doesn't have to have a heavy meaning. It doesn't, just something that gives us a picture of you that we might not have had otherwise from any point in your life. It doesn't have to have anything to do with what we've talked about, just a story.
I've been trying to do the daily walks, right, to get the dog out of the house and my son out of the house. And I like this time of year because I'm reminded um, about dandelions. And until I had my son, I never thought about them. They were just kind of a weed. They were something my dad always tried to get rid of in the yard. They were just kind of everywhere. And as a kid, I knew you could like make a wish and blow on them, and that was always fun. Um, but when my son was just under a couple years old, and he was cruising around and walking and exploring on his own, and we would go to the park, he was fascinated by them. He loved them. And he just, he'd want to hunt for them and collect them whenever we walked. So I started noticing them, and I thought how cool it is that this thing that's been here all along that I didn't really pay much attention to was given so much meaning by someone I love. And now it's something that I can't not see, right? Now I see them everywhere and I'm always on the hunt for them. And I just like metaphorically how they're a weed, they're kind of this unwanted, unthought about thing. And yet to my son, they were something magical and fun and special and precious. And so I try to remember to look at everything that way, that something that I might have overlooked before could be something very sacred to someone else. And I even had a dandelion tattooed on my arm to remind me of him. So I've been thinking about those because this is the time of year where they're everywhere. So that's just a nice reminder, to kind of take the obvious and the mundane and try to find, different ways of thinking about it.
And what a perfect moment for us all to be doing that,
Mm-hmm.
to try and find the magical in everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much, Rebecca Blake Thompson. This has been delightful, and you are really a pleasure to talk with. And I will be talking with you again. Thank you, everyone who's listening. This is Inclusivi-TALKS, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, Lori.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye.
If she's a mouse